In the Soviet Union, there was a real Iron Curtain, an invisible border that separated the country from the rest of the world. Officially, it was said to protect Soviet people from the harmful influence of the West. But in reality, the authorities were simply afraid that people would see another life, other ideas, and want freedom. Even those who had the right to go abroad went through real trials. For example, Soviet diplomats and intelligence officers who worked abroad were subjected to multiple levels of scrutiny upon their return. They were interrogated, their connections were checked, their personal belongings and even their correspondence were examined. Their task was not only to work abroad, but also to return without alien thoughts. There was a special list of countries where traveling was forbidden to everyone, even the party elite. These were states that were considered dangerous from the point of view of Soviet ideology. For example, traveling to the USA, Great Britain, or France was unrealistic for an ordinary person. Even members of the CPSU Central Committee could be refused travel if there was even the slightest possibility that they would fall under the influence of the West. But it was not just a matter of ideology. Abroad, a Soviet person could see shops full of goods, free newspapers, and hear music that was banned in the USSR. The authorities feared that those who returned would start telling others about it. This could create resentment and jeopardize the system itself. The Soviet leadership knew that if people saw how people lived outside the country, many would not want to return. This fear was not unfounded. In the late 40s and early 50s, the USSR lost dozens of famous scientists who fled abroad on scientific trips. These people were not just specialists, they were the leading minds of the country, in which the state invested huge resources. Each such escape became a personal blow to the prestige of the Soviet Union. In order to prevent such cases, in the 1970s the KGB created a special unit that was engaged in only one thing: tracking every citizen who was entitled to travel abroad. It did not matter whether it was an artist, a scientist, or an ordinary tourist. Everyone was under surveillance, and not only abroad, but also after their return. Scientists, sportsmen, and artists, those who could be of interest to foreign intelligence services, were watched especially closely. Before traveling, they were tested for ideological firmness for a long time, forced to sign obligations to return, and even reminded that their families remained in their homeland. But even this was not enough. People returning from abroad were again subjected to interrogations and inspections. They were questioned about who they had socialized with, what they had seen, what books they had brought back. In some cases, their letters were read and their telephone conversations were tapped. Such total control and constant distrust gave people a sense of fear. They realized that even abroad they were not free. Any phrase said to the wrong person could become a reason for problems on their return. It turns out that traveling abroad in the Soviet Union was not just a rarity. It was almost an unattainable dream. Even if a person did not intend to flee or break the law, the process of obtaining a permit turned into a quest with a lot of checks and bureaucratic barriers. To travel even to a friendly socialist country, such as Bulgaria or the GDR, a Soviet citizen had to obtain permission from several authorities at once. First, approval from the management at the place of work or study. Then, the consent of the trade union. After that, the documents were sent to the district party committee, where they checked the ideological reliability of the applicant. And finally, the last barrier was the KGB, and this was only the first stage. Even if a person passed all the checks, additional conditions awaited him. For example, civil servants or scientists were often forced to sign a document on non-disclosure of classified information, and those who worked at defense enterprises were not allowed to leave the country at all. But even this was not enough. In the 1980s, when the policy of détente began and international relations improved a little, it would seem that the restrictions should have become softer. But in practice, it turned out to be the opposite. Less than 1% of the population of the USSR had the opportunity to go abroad at least once in their lives, and most often it was not ordinary people, but representatives of the elite, diplomats, scientists, athletes, artists. They were trusted not because they were believed, but because they could be controlled. The Soviet tourist once abroad was never truly free. Even when he thought he was walking the streets of Paris or enjoying the beaches of Bulgaria, he was being watched. And it wasn't paranoia, it was reality. Hotels that housed Soviet citizens were also monitored. In popular hotels, especially in Eastern Europe or in the resorts of Bulgaria, there were rooms specially equipped for wiretapping. These rooms were equipped with hidden microphones that recorded the conversations of tourists. This allowed the KGB to find out what they were talking about among themselves, what they were discussing, and even whether they were planning to try to escape. Western intelligence services knew about this, but turned a blind eye because such hotels were often used to accommodate specifically Soviet citizens. But what happened if someone did decide to break the rules and escape abroad? Escape from the USSR seemed for many to be a salvation and the beginning of a new life. But in reality, it was only the beginning of a nightmare. If someone dared to stay abroad, the Soviet authorities started a hunt. If the fugitive could not be captured, his life did not become peaceful. The KGB spread rumors that the fugitive was a traitor, an agent of foreign secret services. This deprived him of support among Soviet emigrants and made him a pariah even abroad. But the worst consequences awaited those who remained in the USSR, the families of the fugitives. They were automatically blacklisted. Parents could be fired from their jobs or demoted. Children were denied access to prestigious universities. In some cases, relatives were summoned for interrogation and tried to force them to write letters urging the fugitive to return. Newspapers could print articles calling a fugitive a traitor to the homeland. People were taught to regard such fugitives as enemies and their families as accomplices. Restrictions on traveling abroad in the USSR were not only due to politics and fear of escape. There was another, no less important factor: money, or rather, control over it. If citizens started traveling abroad en masse and spending foreign currency on clothes, appliances, or Western books, it would be a serious blow to the economy. Therefore, Soviet tourists were given a limited amount of currency, usually around $30 to $50. This money was only enough for the simplest souvenirs or a few meals. But even such a small amount had to be officially received and accounted for. As a result, even the few people who traveled abroad could only bring with them the permitted amount of purchases. At the border, their belongings were checked, and if a person had too many ideologically dangerous items, books, magazines, or music records, they could be confiscated. But even tight currency controls and travel restrictions could not last forever. By the mid-1980s, the Soviet Union began to change rapidly. Mikhail Gorbachev came to power with the slogans of Glasnost and Perestroika. These words promised freedom of speech, openness, and reform. But for millions of Soviet citizens, the most important change was something else. They got the chance to see the world outside the USSR. Whereas traveling abroad had previously been the privilege of only a select few. Diplomats, scientists, or artists. Now even an ordinary person could dream of traveling abroad. In 1989, the first travel agency appeared in the USSR, which could officially organize trips abroad. Before that, all tours were controlled by the state through Intourist, where each group was accompanied by a KGB agent. But now everything has changed. There were tours to resorts in Bulgaria, trips to Hungary, and even bus tours of Europe. Soviet citizens saw for the first time a world they had previously known only from rare films and stories. They went to shops where the shelves were full of goods. They tasted dishes they had never even heard of. And most importantly, they communicated with foreigners without fear. The Iron Curtain could not keep the country from changing. Perestroika opened up the world to people, but with this freedom came new challenges. For some people, the foreign country became the beginning of a new life, while for others it became a source of disappointment.